David Reynolds came home to find his backyard stolen, bulldozed, paved over, and turned into a reeking waste facility. Without his permission, at the center of it all stood Karen Thompson, the ruthless HOA president, who thought she could rewrite property lines, forge documents, and bully him into submission. But what? She didn't know David had a legal ace up his sleeve, and when the truth came out, it wasn't his house. That got demolished. It was the HOA itself. But just wait until you hear the shocking final blow that turned this battle into a total annihilation. David Reynolds had always taken pride in his home. It wasn't just a house, it was his sanctuary. 15 years of hard work, sweat and careful planning had turned it into something straight out of a magazine. Lush green lawn, a sleek wooden patio with soft lighting, and a vegetable garden where he grew the sweetest tomatoes you could ever taste. This was his space, his kingdom, and no one had ever dared to mess with it until now, the moment he pulled into his driveway. Something felt off at first. It was the smell, a thick, rancid stench that seemed to cling to the air, clogging his nostrils. Like a fistful of rotting fish, it was the kind of smell that seeped into your skin, the kind that made your stomach churn. Then, as he stepped out of his truck, his breath caught in his throat. His backyard gone, not damaged, not altered, erased. Where there had once been life, there was now chaos, towering metal fences, heavy construction equipment, and a massive bulldozer grinding his land into dust. His vegetable garden obliterated, his patio buried under a fresh layer of concrete slabs. Workers in orange vests moved around barking orders, stacking steel beams like they were assembling some industrial nightmare. What the actual hell was this? David didn't even bother unpacking. He slammed the truck door and marched straight to the HOA office, fist clenched, blood pounding in his ears. Someone was to explain this, and it better be one hell of an explanation. The moment he stepped inside, there she was. Karen Thompson, HOA president, queen of petty rules and passive-aggressive emails. She sat behind her polished mahogany desk, her two white teeth flashing in a plastic smile, like she'd been expecting him. "Oh, David," she keyed, tilting her head in fake surprise. "You weren't supposed to be back so soon." David could feel his jaw tighten. What the hell was that supposed to mean? He slammed both hands on her desk, his voice a low growl. "What the hell is this? That's my land. You can't just build a trash dump." There, Karen barely flinched instead. She leaned back in her chair, folded her hands neatly, and gave him a look that made his blood boil, like he was a child, throwing a tantrum over a broken toy. "Actually," she said, dragging out the word like she was speaking to an idiot. It's for the community, David. You should be honored. They had bulldozed his property, turned his backyard into a festering landfill, and she expected him to feel honored. David could feel his heart hammering in his chest, his vision narrowing as rage swelled inside him. His hands curled into fists at his sides, nails digging into his palms. He forced himself to stay calm, to breathe through the fury that clotted his throat. "This is legal," he said through gritted teeth. "You can't just take someone's property." And Karen sighed dramatically, like he was boring her. Then, with a smirk so smug you wanted to wipe it off her face, she shrugged, then Sue. Us. David knew he had to act fast. Every second he wasted, they got away with more, but the deeper he dug, the worse it got, like peeling back the layers of a rotten onion. Each one more rancid than the last, his property value destroyed. Who in their right mind would want to live next to a teeming mountain of decaying trash? The realtor, Spochetto, didn't even sugarcoat it. "David, your house is basically worthless now. You'd be lucky to get pennies on the dollar. The noise unbearable. His peaceful mornings of coffee on the patio gone. Instead, his days were now filled with an endless, torturous Symphony of hell, metal crashing, the ear-splitting beeping of reversing trucks, and the constant teeth-grinding roar of industrial grinders shoeing through mountains of garbage at night. He could still hear it in his head even when everything was silent. And then there was his backyard, or what was left of it. The HOA hadn't just stolen Heisland, they had reprogrammed reality, itself the official property lines, theonies that had been on record for decades. Mysteriously changed, according to the new official documents, his land was now part of the HOA's communal area, no notice, no hearing. No consent, just gone. So he did what any sane person would do. He fought back first. He called the city council. Surely someone in local government would see the insanity of this and put an end to it, but instead of help he got a bureaucratic nightmare. That's an HOA matter, sir. We don't handle those disputes. Try the zoning commission. You'll need to file a formal complaint. Processing time is about 8-12 weeks. Every call led to another dead end. It was like trying to navigate a maze designed to break people down until they gave up. Fine lawyers. Then he called everyone: real estate attorneys, property rights specialists, even some high-powered firms in Phoenix, and while some were sympathetic, they all said the same thing: fighting an HOA is an uphill battle. They have more money, more legal power, and more time than you are. You sure you want to go through with this? David wanted to throw his phone against the wall. Didn't anyone care that what they did was blatantly illegal? And then came the final straw. A letter arrived in his mailbox, thick and official looking. He ripped it open, expecting maybe some overdue city response. No, it was a fine of $5. Sideshow zero fine from the HOA for landscaping violations. His land, which they stole, destroyed, and paved over, was now considered an eyesore, and for that, they were finding him. David stood in his ruined yard, clinging the letter so hard his fingers ached. He stared at the towering walls of the waste plant, the bulldozer still at work, the air so thick with filth he could almost taste it. They had stolen his land, destroyed it, turned it into a literal garbage dump, and now they were coming for his wallet. Then, like a twisted cherry on top, Karen had the audacity to show up at his house. She knocked cheerfully, like they were old friends, her fake sympathy dripping like spoiled honey. "Oh, David," she sighed, shaking her head as if she actually gave a damn. "I know this must be tough for you. The fines, the noise, it's a lot to handle." David said nothing, just stared, his grip tightening on the letter, his pulse hammering in his ears. Karen smiled. She was enjoying this. "If the fees are too much," she continued, her voice oozing fake concern, "you could always just sell us your house. We'd give you a fair price there." It was the real reason behind it all. This wasn't about a community project. This wasn't about the greater good. They wanted him gone. They were trying to break him, bury him under enough legal fees, fines, and stress that he'd crawl away in defeat, leaving his home, and what little value it had left, for them to snatch up for pennies. What Karen didn't realize, David wasn't the type to roll over. David wasn't about to go down without a fight. He knew exactly what he was up against. An HOA that had money, influence, and no moral compass. If he wanted a chance at winning, he couldn't afford to hire just any lawyer. He needed someone who thrived on destruction, someone who didn't just settle cases, but obliterated his opponents, someone who took personal satisfaction in watching corrupt organizations crumble into dust. That's when he found Ethan. Cole. Ethan had a reputation. He was the kind of attorney that HOAs whispered about behind closed doors, the kind that made board members lose sleep. He had built his career on taking down corrupt property associations, exposing fraud, and making entire neighborhoods regret the day they ever tried to cheat a homeowner. David barely had time to explain before Ethan was already flipping through the documents, his sharp blue eyes scanning every forged signature. every altered zoning record, every fraudulent claim, and then after just a few minutes, he did something unexpected. "He lost this, Ethan," said, shaking his head as he tossed one of the papers onto the desk like it was worthless is illegal. "On so many levels, it's almost impressive. They forged documents, they falsified property lines, they violated multiple state zoning laws, they buried you under fake fees and threats, all while pretending they were operating within HOA guidelines." He leaned back in his chair, his fingers tapping against the polished wood of his desk. "And they actually thought you wouldn't fight back." David clenched his jaw. "What are our chances?" Ethan's smirk was razor sharp. "We're not just going to fight them," he said, his voice low and deliberate. His eyes gleamed. "We're going to bury them." And that's exactly what they did. The lawsuit wasn't just a legal move. It was a declaration of war. David went after the HOA with everything they had, hitting them with charges so severe, sound undeniable, that there was no way they could wiggle out of it. Property fraud, forging documents to steal his land. Andrew Wright property. Lynn illegal land seizure, destroying his backyard, bulldozing his property, and claiming it as common area environmental violations. Because they hadn't just stolen his land, they had turned it into an unregulated waste dump, complete with toxic runoff and illegal disposal practices. And here was the real kicker. The one thing that sent them into full-blown panic mode: the HOA had never actually secured the proper permits to build the facility. If David could prove that his land was still legally his, then every single dollar they had dumped into the construction, the fencing, the machinery, the industrial-grade garbage compactors, every cent was now a wasted investment. The entire project would be illegal, and the HOA would be forced to demolish everything at their own expense. It wasn't just about stopping them, it was about crippling them. Beyond recovery, the moment the lawsuit was filed, the panic set in first. They tried to destroy his reputation. HOA board members flooded local Facebook groups with posts claiming David was a greedy troublemaker who was suing to bankrupt the community they called him. Selfish accused him of trying to raise HOA fees for innocent homeowners, and even suggested that he had fabricated the entire situation for a quick payday. When that didn't work, they turned to Bradbury city officials, who had ignored David for months, suddenly became hesitant to get involved. Permits that had once been deemed invalid were no wonder review reports of zoning violations mysteriously disappeared from the public records. It didn't take a genius to figure out what was happening. Someone had been paid off, and when else failed, the HOA resorted to outright threats. One evening, David pulled into his driveway and noticed something taped to his front door. It was a thick envelope, the kind that carried official legal notices. At first he thought it might be something from the court, maybe update on the case, but when he tore it open, his stomach dropped. Inside was a notice of foreclosure. The HOA was claiming that David was behind on dues, a fabricated debt completely made up out of thin air. They were demanding immediate payment, or they would begin the process of seizing his home. They weren't just trying to steal his land anymore. They were trying to take everything. David stood there on his porch, gripping the papers so hard his knuckles turned white. They were desperate, they were playing dirty. They were throwing everything they had at him, hoping he'd crack, hoping he'd break under the pressure and just give up, but they had underestimated him. David didn't break, he didn't back down, because what? They didn't know what they couldn't possibly realize was that he had a secret weapon. The morning of the trial, Karen walked into the courtroom with the same arrogant confidence she had worn the day she told David to sue his chin, high heels clicking against the polished floor. She strutted in as if she were invincible, as if this was nothing more than a minor inconvenience. She'd brush aside with a few well-placed lies and a smug smile. She took her seat at the defendant's table, barely sparing David a glance, her fingers tapping idly against the desk. She thought this was a show, that she would walk away, unscathed, untouchable, just like she always had before. David, however, just waited. The trial barely lasted an hour. That was all it took for the court to shred through the HOA's mountain of lies like A wolf tearing through tissue paper forged documents exposed the so-called revised property lines had been altered illegally. And the judge made it clear that the land had never not, for a second, belonged to the HOA. Illegal rezoning reversed the court, reviewed the city's official zoning records and found that the HOA had tampered with them, not just bending the law, but outright breaking it. Fake fines nullified the HOA's fraudulent $5,000 landscaping violgone, the foreclosure attempt declared illegal. The board's fabricated fees, penalties and harassment rendered worthless. Karen's smug expression began to crack. Then came the nail in the coffin: David's secret weapon. A whistleblower, one of the HOA board members, a man who had once been firmly in Karen's pocket, had turned on her. Theris and simple. She had gotten too greedy. She had made the mistake of assuming loyalty was stronger than self-preservation, and now he was willing to talk. The courtroom fell into a stunned silence as the recordings began to play. Karen's voice, clear as day, laughing. "People like David are so easy to screw over," she sneered in their recording. "He actually thinks he has rights. It's pathetic. And then the final blow, he'll give up just like the rest of them. We'll wear him down, drag this out, and when he's desperate enough, he'll sell for pennies. Then we bulldoze the house and make a killing." A slow, deadly silence spread through the courtroom. David turned his head just in time to see the judge's face go a deep, furious red. His voice, when he finally spoke, was like a thunderclap. "I am ordering the immediate demolition of the illegal waste facility," he said, his tone cold, final, unquestionable. Karen's entire body went rigid, but it wasn't over, not even close. The judge continued his glare. On the HOA's legal team, the plaintiff is awarded $2.8 million in damages. Karen's face drained of color. The HOA's attorneys sat in stunned silence, scrambling through their paperwork, as if they could somehow rewrite reality in real time. But there was no getting out of this. Karen, she didn't strut anymore. She resigned in disgrace before she could be formally removed, disappearing from the HOA board as if she had never existed. The HOA itself completely bankrupt, between the massive fine, the demolition costs, and the civil lawsuits from other homeowners who had finally woken up to their corruption. The entire organization collapsed in on itself. Within months, the HOA ceased to exist. Its board members scattered, its power gone. Forever. And David, he got his land back. He got his money, and he got the satisfaction of watching them burn as he stood in his backyard, watching the bulldozers tear down the waste facility. He felt a deep, settled kind of triumph. They had thought they could steal from him, bury him under bureaucracy, crush him with lies and intimidation. Now they were the ones losing everything, and for the first time in months, as the walls of their legal plant crumbled into rubble, David laughed.